Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking about micro housing developments. The fact that we've got a housing shortage and that we've also got, I guess, a housing affordability crisis. Today's topic is a very, very creative solution to help actually solve that, and we've got an expert in this field, Amy Degenhart, that from Degenhart. So I'm going to get this right. Degenhart Architecture and Urban Design.
It's all right. It's Degenhart Shared Architecture and plus Urban Design, but that's all good. It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. So thank you. Welcome, Amy. Thank you very much. We're going to be talking about a project that you did a couple of years ago, which is very, very unique and solves a problem in a very particular way. So firstly, thank you for coming on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who is Amy and who is Degenhart Architecture and Urban Design?
Yeah, sure. I am an architect. I'm in partnership with an urban designer with Degenhart Shared Architecture and Urban Design. And one thing I should mention is also the development company is called Bubble Up. And the reason for that is because Bubble is a neighborhood, and also in terms of the way economics work, we like to think of it as bubble up economics because it's kind of starting at the grassroots and bubbling up.
As opposed to trickle down where everyone else tries to talk to it.
That's right.
Yes, very good. So tell me a little bit about your business. So Degenhart Degenhart Shed.
Degenhart Shed, yeah.
I keep forgetting Shed. What does, I guess, the architecture and urban design, tell us a little bit about, I guess, the two parts of that. A lot of our viewers wouldn't really be familiar with urban design concepts. So
yeah, certainly. Well, urban design is not focusing on the built form of the building itself, but the spaces in between. So that's how our community is linked together. And we actually kind of focus on that really small scale of urban design, what people experience as they're walking down the sidewalk, and how one building actually does relate to the other, or to the green space or the transport. So we kind of call that a micro urban design context. Just that nuance of how communities kind of look at that, basically the pedestrian scale that you can walk in, within sort of a half an hour. Our practice started in way back last century, sort of 1988. And we've been practicing on the Gold Coast as a boutique practice for that period of time, sometimes under different names. And when it was appreciated that the partners are basically where our customers are very working very directly with the principals, we changed the name to our last names being Degenhart and my partner's last name Shed. It just is a lovely name for an architect to have, a shed, and we thought we'd just kind of roll with that. We do architecture. Our kind of motto is better places, better spaces, and a better bottom line, because we actually deliberately work with developers. Being on the Gold Coast, we're interested in working with developers. And in fact, when we came to Australia from Chicago, we had sought out particularly to work with developers to continue an education piece that we started at the Illinois Institute of Technology about doing case studies and how developers might introduce design and architecture earlier in the process, and how that value could be appreciated at the end of the process as an uplift in the return.
Very good. Now we're going to talk about a very, very specific project, one that I guess you called ENVI from a marketing perspective. So tell us a little bit, firstly, before we go into the project itself, how did the concept of this actually come about?
Well, first of all, it is nice to tell the story about the ENVI name. Effectively, early last century, there was a undue subdivision of lands act in Queensland, which made it very difficult to do small lots. And so Martin and I, having come from Chicago, having traveled and having children living in Sydney and Melbourne, we were very envious of terrace housing, to be quite honest. So the name ENVI, kind of was blossomed from that, but we just wanted to give a little bit of a, kind of the, everything I is very popular. So ENVI with an I was the way we wanted to roll with that. The project was born out of a confluence of stars aligning, I guess you might say. The priority development area in Southport was gazetted, I think, in 2013. We had a friend who had a lot within that precinct, and I happened to be the chair of the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Coast and Northern Rivers region at that time. I was working with a town planner, Nicole Bennett, who was the chair of the Planning Institute of Australia at that time. We were working on another project nearby. My friend approached us and said, well, what can we do on this 506 square meter site in this PDA now that I've got unlimited height and all sorts of controls are gone? And we said, let's have a look. And so we did up a little high-rise design for that site, brought it through the real estate professionals for a bit of a feasibility, reverse feasibility. Nicole and I had been up all night as CEO sleep out for homelessness, ironically. And we went back in with the clients the next day for the feedback on the FISO. And it turned out that it would, the amount of value for the land for a high-rise development for that particular site would be less than as a house site. So that was a real moment where the light bulb went off. I had been working on small lots at Fitzgibbon Chase with Economic Development Queensland. I think it was ULDA at the time, Urban Land Development Authority at the time. And the idea of using small lots to create density instead of multi-unit was being pioneered there. And it only had recently been proven up that lots as small as 50 square meters were able to support house and land packages that were around about that sort of $300,000 price point. They were valuing up. It was happening. It was real. And we said, look, the priority development area is throwing away all the rules and then replacing them with some good design criteria with some flexibility. But one of the rules, so to speak, was minimum lot sizes. So that was what inspired us to take a different tact instead of apartments, to investigate what we might be able to do with a small lot subdivision.
Yeah, so thank you for all that. I want to go back and re-emphasize some of the things that you said that some of our viewers might have saw whizzing past and kind of missed. So 506 square meters, it was zoned unlimited height, right?
Yeah.
In order to get something with unlimited height, you pretty much have to, I guess, tunnel your way to the core of the earth in order to get car parking for something like that. But you've decided to carve this up into small lots instead, down to as little as 50 square meters for a house and land package.
Well, it was an evolving story. So that was that particular site. And look, we did creatively tackle the car parking, and there's still a density cap, even though there's no height cap. There's still a density cap because of the size of the land. So we were only actually interrogating a design that was about 7 stories, and there was only 2 levels of car park, and all that was fine. But the shock was that by the time you did all you had to do for a high rise and the type of construction, the value, you couldn't, the value in the land, it sucked the value out of the land. And that, of course, did not please my client who owned the piece of land. Yeah. So at that point, we pivoted and realized that we were on the right idea in terms of shifting to micro lots. But my particular client on that site wasn't interested in pursuing that. It was easier for him just to sell that lot to somebody else for another style of development. Whereas Nicole Bennett and I, we decided that we would find a suitable lot in the priority development area of the garden precinct portion. We wrote letters to 14 of the owners. At the time you go to council and you get the rate notice and you get the addresses of the owners. We wrote letters to 14 of them and said, look, here we are, this was our mission statement. We seek to deliver all that embraces the urban village, which is authentic, considered, outcome-focused, and community-driven, by undertaking development in order of priority, socially valuable, environmentally responsible, and economically successful manner, with a pay-it-forward benefit, which is one of your mottos as well, I realize, for the community, And we'll take decisions based on the highest level of professional standard to make certain development outcomes that are leading best practice for all involved. So we'd sort of developed our mission statement. We sent that out to the 14 landowners in the Garden Precinct. 3 of them came back with, hey, I'm interested. And we met with one of those landowners on a Wednesday because he was just about to list his lot with an agent. And on Saturday, we had signed a contract with him for that block of land because it was in fact ideal. It was what we ended up with for the ENVI Micro Urban Village lot, 673 square meters. It was, I believe, over 40 square meters of street frontage. And we'll allude to this later, but that street frontage is very, very valuable for driveways and street infrastructure, trees, etc. Street trees. So that is, in fact, where the project came from. So we to the other.
So the germination of an idea with one, I guess, and a lot of our clients will go out and send letters and that sort of thing. I don't think they're going to be as well articulated as yours was, but they do succeed, folks, sending letters out. Now, what did you say? 607 square meters. What you finally?
It was 673. But 61 square meters of easement, and that easement was an access easement, which is a driveway that serviced 2 townhouse projects behind us. So we were on a corner, and those 2 projects sort of faced the alternate street, but their cars came in across our lot. The easement was formed in 1950, wow. 50, I believe, and it was it had the words horse and carriage in the easement, and it is exactly the same easement today. We did not change the easement.
The fact that there's no horses and carriages, surely you could get that dissolved, no?
It's nice not to do. You know what?
Oh, good.
It's nice. It's nice not to do stuff where you don't have to.
No, absolutely. Now I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many house and land packages did you actually put together on this particular project?
All right. So on that particular lot, we did end up with 10 what we call freehold lots, and we did deliver them as house and land packages. Now, 9 of the lots are built on, and 1 is still vacant, and that was due to a bit of a COVID interruption into the building process.
So let's take a short look at the actual outcome of the finished product, which, and I might just for the moment just turn off your name and that sort of thing, so everyone can actually take a really good look at that. Folks, that is some of the smallest stock that you're actually going to get on its own individual title. I guess freehold is not quite the right answer, but I guess, but effectively on its own individual title.
It is the right answer for every one of us that's not a solicitor. It's only my solicitor that always corrects me and says it's strata title with no common property.
Yeah.
But we'll just leave that aside. And if you put the picture back, I might like to make a comment, Rob, because part of the other question that you were leading into was that we got lots down to 50 square meters. That is in fact true of Fitzgibbon Chase. In fact, I think the smallest was one that I created through a design with another client, and that was 45 square meters. But the lot that's the smallest at ENVI is actually 38 square meters.
Holy smokes.
It is 38, not much more than what you would have for a double garage. It's hard to believe, and it's even harder to believe that it's the one that has the house on it, which is white with a little orange feature.
This one here?
That's correct. That is in fact the smallest lot. It is a 38 square meter lot, and the reason it's a bit wider than the other lots is because in fact it's shorter. It has 3 built back-to-back built-to-boundary walls, but it has a little courtyard in the back for light and ventilation, and I would say I probably have created the smallest backyard in Australia on that lot, but I also believe that is the smallest freehold lot, a residential lot in Australia, purposely created for a home.
I'm gonna say, without doing any research at all, no Google searches, I think you are categorically right on that one. Look, very, very.
I'm waiting for somebody to prove me wrong, and that's why I put it out there. If somebody's created a new one that's smaller, that I just need to correct myself. But for now, I haven't got that back yet, that anyone's gone under that amount.
It's a challenge, folks. If you can do a house and land package under 38 square meters, then we're going to take that. We're going to take that challenge. As a matter of fact, I'll take a bet that nobody will actually beat that. So. So the actual density, you touched on, I guess, the stats on this. 150 dwellings per hectare is actually the ratio of what you actually got on there. That is insane. Now, I want to be very clear, I guess, to everyone that's actually watching out there. This is rarefied air. You're not going to be able to do this, I guess, on your normal everyday multi-res type site. This is, I guess, the perfect opportunity where you've got council had put some provisions that they wanted high density in the area, and I guess some exceptions to some rules that allowed you to dance around the rules a little bit, and you danced pretty hard.
Yeah, we did some good dancing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We were given a great dance floor to start with the priority development area and the Southport scheme, and that sort of took away some of what I think of in town planning as the more restrictive commodity controls. Just your numerical stuff, your minimum lot sizes, your maximum site covers, your sort of parking, and sometimes even your private open space sizes, things like that. Just numbers, and then you kind of doing a number crunching exercise rather than a value seeking exercise. So and value and lifestyle. So architects always talk about Vitruvius and commodity and surety and delight. And I like to say that what we're doing is taking that commodity version of the formula and we're kind of trading it off with delight. And we're playing with the commodity figures and we're upping the delight at the same time. So we're not just doing more commodity. We're not just doing more and just rating the numbers for that sake. We're actually using those flexibilities in commodity that were given by the priority development scheme to deliver greater delight. And some of that greater is affordability. It's being able to have a house instead of a unit, so you've got contact with the ground. It's all of those sorts of things. But just to clarify on the density, so dwellings per hectare is something that we kind of it sort of speaks to the typologies of houses. So your suburbs might be 15 to 20 dwellings per hectare. Then you get into your townhouses, and I suppose they're probably 30 to 60. And then your normal apartment buildings or high-rise apartment buildings, they're 100 dwellings per hectare is kind of around about where they sit. And it's interesting to note that the site was seen as and kind of in the area to be an apartment building site. We investigated that as an option, but it wasn't the highest and best use of the site. And it's one of those things that, it's great to have an idea, but you also have to be mindful that it's the right idea. So you want to test the alternatives. And we did test the concept of an apartment building on that site, similar to the one we did for our friend. And it did come out that the micro lot was the better financial outcome, as well as what we believe far superior in terms of an amenity outcome.
Yeah, you touched on highest and best use there, and highest and best use is, I have a definition. There's probably a more legal definition, but it's the most amount of money with the least amount of hassle and the least amount of time. It's not always the maximum density. It is about knowing what the product is actually going to sell for, knowing what it's actually going to take to construct, the hassle factor of actually getting there. And as you said, you could get more dwellings on there, but they weren't necessarily going to be profitable. So that's the point.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. So let's talk about. We've said 38 square meters is the smallest one, but what does that constitute? Are we basically just a room? Is it basically someone sleeping on the floor with a swag? What amenity did we actually get out of these dwellings?
Well, that particular one was It's quite unique, and I mean, we did try to standardize the plans for a bit of rationalization, but there, some bumps on the road in the development meant that we ended up subdividing one of the larger lots into two, which meant that where we started out with 3 products, we ended up with 5 or 6 in terms of the outcomes. And that particular one, we were, jargon a little bit, but we refer to it as the pico pod because the pico is that atomic measurement that's less than the nano and the micro. But it's, it's the smallest lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a small house. Now, we were able to do a fairly high site coverage. So the house itself is a 67 square meter house. So that's, when you think back, part of the issue of the housing crisis we're having now, when you think back to kind of last century, our parents were sort of comfortably living in 3-bedroom houses that were maybe 80 square meters, that sort of thing. And they're just the way they're laid out and open in 1 bathroom and that sort of thing. 80 square meters was, fairly comfortable for 3 bedrooms. So a 67 square meter house, let's round it up to 70. You can see it's not sheep stations away. So how that particular house is designed, it is 2 stories, and as you see, all of the ENVI ones are 2 stories, except there's a sneaky little mezzanine in about 3 of them, and we embed that into the attic space, and that's keeping it away from the 3-story construction, which gets a bit expensive, but still giving, in my view as an architect, giving that opportunity for volume ceiling. So that 67 square meter house had a very high volume ceiling on the first floor. So it's roughly split evenly. In fact, the design is, I often call it the caterpillar design because it's kind of the same top and bottom. It doesn't matter which way it's going, it's the same. And it included a sort of an inline kitchen, a dining stroke living area, an extra room, and then an associated bathroom. So that room could either be extra living space, a dining room, an office, or a bedroom. And we just use simple robe door partitions to let the user decide. So it's like the Goosebumps books, it's kind of like you choose the scare. So you get to decide how you're going to use your 67 square meters. And that's really important when you got down to the smaller homes. It's very important to try and keep spaces as open and flexible as possible. In that particular one, we actually we provided 2 kitchens to make it exactly identical, and that was to encourage the use of the ground floor as a home-based business, because that was one of the other unique characteristics that was available in the priority development area. And it was, in fact, newly gazetted as the central business district of the Gold Coast in Southport.
Very good. So that's that particular one. But what were the range of number of bedrooms across the 10 dwellings that you've got?
Well, we had envisioned to have those original 3 classic designs. One was the micro terrace, which was 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom on the first floor, and an open ground floor in a sort of a flute format. So light at the front and light at the back, opening up with bifold doors to a terrace and a very small sort of amount of garden, but very well used. And that micro terrace had a front courtyard as well, and it had no car on site. And then we had our urban pods, which were the most popular by far. They were the bread and butter, the sweet spot for most buyers. The urban pods are in fact the you've got the one with the vertical slats, and then next to that next to that on the right is a micro terrace, and then you have 2 of the urban pods coming forward again, and then you've got 2 micro terraces pulling back. And then you have what we call the extended urban pod on the far right. And we called that extended urban pod because it actually had a bit of extra land width on the right. And it was able to have an independent entry, which you can't see in the photo. And then we had our village homes, which were intended to be 3 bedrooms. Now, we ended up with none of those because that was, in fact, going to be where the White House and the one next to it was going to be one house as a village home, 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2 car in tandem. You're basically your suburban house in the city, but that product didn't sell, and we have not created one of those yet. So ultimately, there's basically they're all 2 bedrooms, sometimes with maybe it's a 1 bedroom plus study, sometimes there's a 2 bedroom plus study, but effectively 2 bedroom homes.
Very good. And architecturally, they all have differences, I guess, from a street appeal perspective. So they, I guess, blend nicely. They look the part. I've on your website, you've actually got some videos with regards to actually walking through the product. So they don't feel cramped at all. They feel quite roomy.
Yeah, it was an interesting scenario in introducing a 3.6 meter wide lot. And by the time you've got a little bit of setback and the thickness of the walls, your space inside is about 3.35 meters, I think. And so storage, spline, open space. But we thought it would be a real challenge for people to get their minds around it. But I think that they were just so thrilled to have the opportunity to buy a house for the price of a unit and still have all the benefits of being on the ground and own a home in a freehold title without, might I say, body corporate, which we didn't mention. We don't mention often enough, but that's a real, draw card to these. So that 3.6 meter wide format was reasonably well accepted. In fact, most people, when the house was finally up and the walls were there and they walked through it for the first time, they said, wow, it's actually bigger than I expected. But as architects, we prepared videos and walkthroughs and that sort of thing. So, and we're, it's all very accurate. So there's no kind of real surprises except for the genuine surprise and actually thinking that it's more than what you were signing up for. And that's the best thing, get them to be pleasantly surprised. Yeah,
absolutely. So over and above the actual design and the layout and that sort of thing, there was a whole bunch of problems that you had to solve on site that in order to get the density together. So, and we've mentioned it a couple of times, but the fact that we were selling them as house and land packages, there's a couple of specific challenges that have to go in place in order for that to actually occur. So I guess firstly, so that everyone knows what a house and land package is, that's where the land is sold on one contract and the build or the construction is actually sold on a different contract. And so there's the potential that every single one of these dwellings could have been built by a different builder. And so I guess when we're trying to jam things this close together, there are a couple of little challenges that you had to do to overcome that. But I guess they had to be, I think you touched on it before, they had to be able to be legally built independently and legally demolished independently, which means that they were, I guess, built to boundary shared spaces, but with a wafer thin setback.
Yeah, perfectly said. The actual setback to the boundaries is 25 millimeters, and that's to the frame. So by the time you put a bit of lining on that, it ends up being a little bit less than 50 mil, from wall to wall. So there is this little sliver of air that's between the houses. At one stage we had. So there's 9 there showing on the street front. We had 8 of those under construction, but 1 not, and they were already with the 2 story walls up, and then the slab of the one that finally sold a little bit slower had to go in, and the walls tilted up, which is part of the process. It's kind of the Hardy Smart process to tilt those walls up. That was a perfect example of how the houses could be built independently. Now, it did happen to be the same builder. So as architect developers, we're able to, what we're selling is the vision and the completed thing, but we're not offering you the completed thing. We work together as a team with the purchasers of the land, with the builder, in terms of being the administrator on so we use a QMBA contract, so nothing fancy, just a normal builder's contract, but we were the nominated client representative as the architect, and of course the builders. So with that process, we in fact curated the detailed plans, which conformed to the planning approval. They were approved by the certifier already, so there's all that certainty for the buyers. And then we had a building contract with a price for those buyers, and they could choose to sign that contract or sign another building contract. But what we didn't do was allow very much time for the buyers to make that sort of decision. But in the end of the day, all of the buyers of the lots were going, they were attracted to the lots because it was very much a sort of a process that was laid out for them, and under the professional leadership of an architect. As a first home buyer, by definition, you've not done a home before, so you're the novice, and you need as much professional guidance as you can get in what is actually a complicated process, no matter what home you're doing, let alone an innovative, first of its kind, smallest in Australia, micro lot. So we were able to curate that and sort of construct the ability to do the split contract where the land and the building contract was separate.
Yeah. So there was I guess we touched on a couple of this, but the back-to-back built to boundary with a 25 millimeter gap in between. In order to do that, there's a whole bunch of complications that start to happen whenever you're building houses. So firstly, there's going to be elements where the potential for one property to encroach on another is always there. The fact that you're going to have shared services between properties, almost certainly. So there was a bunch of easement documents that had to be put together to actually allow this to actually occur, to allow each of the sites to both operate independently but also cohesively at the same time. So how did those easement documents come about?
Well, unbelievably, that was one of the easiest things, and that was and I guess ENVI is actually the result of a confluence of many things that happen all of a sudden right together. Dedication of Southport as the community, as the central business district, the priority development area being gazetted government, which gave us the planning controls to work with. But also, very importantly, what you just touched on is the introduction of the high density development easement legislation in Queensland. That meant that the easement documents required for the built to boundary back to back scenario was going from something that might be a sort of 50-page legal document to something that was two A4 sheets, double-sided, in terms of ticking the box and signing. The project wouldn't have been possible without that legislation. So that easement document, the 4 boxes that you tick, whether you're going to have them apply, is I think the idea of the whether there was going to be any encroachment. Encroachment, or I think that's probably the right word. Also, maintenance, which is the biggest thing with built a boundary. What if something needs maintaining? You have to go on the other property and maintain it. So there is easement creates the legal ability to access the other adjoining property to maintain your property and for demolition and construction purposes. The ability to for water to go from one roof to the other if it should need to. We did not design the roofs to do that. And then the ability for things to be attached from, like a clothesline or something like that, minor attachments. Now, the one about encroachments is quite an important one because it does allow us to put a flashing across the opening and bridge that opening and kind of make it look like it's all, just one piece. And you can also tick the box where you can use a slab that goes across both. But of course, we didn't do that because we were doing the split contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So a whole bunch of elements in there to make that happen. So access easement, a water between the properties, encroachment between the buildings, and the ability to attach small fixtures and fittings. Those 4. So if anyone, while that legislation is in Queensland, if you're trying to solve that problem in any of the other states around there, they're really the 4 problems that you just need to get solved.
And the interesting thing about those easements is that they're not physically drawn on the paper. It is only written agreement between the two parties. So you don't actually physically see an easement on the it doesn't have a depth or anything like that. Like it's not 600. It's just a written agreement. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. So, so we touched on, I guess, the challenges from a house and land package perspective, the ability to build it and knock it down. I guess, as independent. Pretty much, you said 9 out of the 10 got built. So the 10th one didn't get built. So there's the opportunity for another builder to come along at some point in time and actually build that 10th one. I guess what happened to the final one?
Yeah, well, there will definitely be another builder because I think that the original builder's probably not that interested. Is usually doing luxury houses of a much larger size. So that particular one was just before COVID. We were organizing a building contract. In fact, it was with another builder. And that was coming together. We had it within the contract of sale, as we usually do, as a requirement in the contract of sale for the land. But they were just playing around with the provisional sum for the structure and, investigating a few different options. I saw it all coming together reasonably well. I knew the builder quite well, and the clients were purchasing were very locals and very straightforward and on board with everything that we're doing. Like they were fans, they love the project. So everything was going to be happening around about February 2020, and then along came something called COVID, and the purchasers their family was split between Singapore and the Gold Coast, and the builder was very distracted with the other projects and how he was going to finish them. So that one is now just waiting for the house to go on it. But in the meantime, building prices have risen, so it's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, anyone coming across a project like this typically would be doing this, I guess, in a multi-res format, whereas this is really, I guess, a house and land being land subdivision type approach. But you've managed to kind of borrow little bits of legislation from the multi-res and little bits of legislation from, I guess, the subdivision process, and kind of Frankenstein, for want of a better word, an outcome that a lot of people typically wouldn't be able to achieve. So the common issues that people would have to deal with something like this: car parking, open space, I guess, bin enclosures, things like that. How did you start to overcome some of those challenges?
Yes, well, just putting a bit of context on it, part of our inspiration and a lot of our background is working with greenfield developers, top tier community developers like Lend-Lease. And even though you might sort of think that what we're doing is kind of borrowing multi-res controls, and in fact we're actually also borrowing strategies that are used in greenfield development areas, which is to use balance sheets for apportioning things on a wider basis, rather than everything having to be compliant individually, every little component. So at Varsity Lakes, for instance, a community done there by Lend-Lease, they would often use the strategy of a car parking balance sheet. So sometimes car parking would be allocated on the street in certain proportions and take out some of the car parking on the sites. So this idea of the car parking balance sheet was then transitioned to ENVI, because very much the whole house and land package delivery model was borrowed from greenfield development. And of course, the reason being, it is pretty much known to be the most affordable way to deliver homes.
Yeah.
House and land package. So there you go. How do you do it? Your greenfield areas are getting further and further out, but we've got infill. So what we're trying to do is kind of take that model and use it in infill.
Yeah.
So with the multi-dwelling controls, because we are in an apartment site effectively within the PDA, there is open space nearby with a broad border parklands and a lot of park areas, close transportation, 400 meters, or you might say a 5-minute walk to the light rail station for public transport. So the provisions for car parking were already reduced on the site to 0.75 per dwelling. With the 10 dwellings, that worked out to 7.5 cars, rounded up to 8. The beautiful opportunity that was given to us through councils and working with the Gold Coast City Council was that they were able to see the benefit in allowing us to allocate those 8 cars on whichever lots we thought appropriate. So some lots would have 2 cars, and some lots would have 1 car, and some lots would have no car. And the ability to have a freehold lot with no car meant that we could change the price point completely. So there was actually $100,000 in the house and land package. There was $100,000 differentiation between the lot that had the same size lot, about 61 square meters. It had the ability to have the car and a larger home, greater site cover, or the same size lot with a smaller home, a bigger garden, which is actually used to satisfy another control, which is permeable area and landscape, and no car. And so those ones with the no car were, they're able to opt in, and that was our target for the first home buyers.
Yeah, it's a really, really creative in order to do that. And I guess the other elements, open space would be a typical one, but as these aren't a multi-res dwelling technically, no open space requirements. That's
correct. Yes, we just had to comply with site cover, but again, that was able to be averaged out across the entire parent lot. So when we go back to thinking about or the terms parent lot, that's the original lot of 673 square meters, and then the child lots are the 10 lots that we created, lots 1 to 10. Yeah. And we were able to look at the site cover also as if it was the house on the parent lot, like one big built form, and look at the overall site coverage, which I think is around 70%, something like that. And then some of the lots would be 50% site cover, and some might be 90% site cover. Yeah. So then we were able to do that, which ultimately gave us the diversity. It gave us the village. It gave us the different demographics. So we had different price points. Yeah, and I guess for those of you all the way around the country, this was done in Queensland. The open space requirements do change in every single jurisdiction. So, for example, I know that in Victoria, that even when they're doing, house and land packages, there still is a requirement for open space to be allocated there. So, this is a very specific and unique to this circumstance. So I don't want anyone to think, hey, we can do this everywhere. But I guess the concepts and the principles, you absolutely can. Yeah, I should clarify that there's 2 types of open space. There's the communal open space and the private open space. We still had private open space requirements, and we borrowed very heavily from the Fitzgibbon development scheme for the criteria, because once you have smaller homes and a more compact community, those dimensions do change a little bit, but there wasn't any need for communal open space. And just to sort of, kind of put into context for listeners, often, it's not always, but I think on the Gold Coast it may be the case that when you have a small multi-unit development, perhaps 4, and I think possibly even 5, you don't have that communal open space requirement. So it's not, it's not too out of kilter, because we've got the 10 dwellings, but they're all very small. So you do have some flexibilities in that open space, and it is one of those things where when you're associated with public open space, it's quite a good idea to actually get the residents to actually use that public open space by only providing the private open space on the site. Very good. So some of the other challenges that you had on the site, this being, I guess, the first of its kind, how did you go about picking price points? There's no previous examples of these happening. How did you pick a price point to know that the project was going to work? Yeah, well, that's the fundamental question, and I've certainly embedded a great respect for valuers and going through the valuation process in order to get the price points right. We all know that it varies a little bit, but not much more than about 5%. So the valuers are pretty spot on, because what they're predicting is what your buyers are going to be able to convince a bank in terms of what the value is. So there's not a lot of wiggle room with valuers. So what we did is we did get a good healthy project valuation where it was, looked at different scenarios, as lots, all in one line with buildings on it, and as if complete with the houses on it, which we were designed prior to doing the valuation. So when that valuation was prepared, the prices in that we took the as if complete prices, but then we realized that there was a little bit of kind of sweat equity, or I call it glow equity, because it's just the patience and the curation of your materials and finishes that the actual buyers of the lots were doing through their building contract. And we knew that that had a value. And so we discounted the what the valuer said as the as if complete price, which would be reasonable if you were just handed the key and you walk in and there it is. We discounted that by about 5%, so that gave that value back to those buyers who were then curating their house and land package and taking the responsibility of their building contract. And that's basically how we did it. Now, we also cross-checked that with a fundamental principle of what we were doing, which was we saw ourselves creating units on the ground. And so we weren't looking at other houses for comparables. We were looking at other units in the area that were being marketed. And of course, that allowed us to look at new product. It was very important because there's such a difference between new and existing product. So we could look at new product that was on the, on the line marketed, and look at a square meter rate per living area and equate that to the houses that we were creating. And that was our double check. So it's always good to have one, source of information and then kind of double check it with another. And that was coming by it two different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were the price points that you were able to achieve on these, given their small stature, but completely independent?
Yeah, that's great. A great question. So we had a goal starting out when we started out, and we were angling for the first home buyers. And at that time, they could access the $25,000 house, the home owner's grant. We were thinking we could get a house and land package together for $300,000. That was not possible. We ended up having 3 price points at the very beginning of the project, and this is going back some time. So this is going back to 2015, even when we first started the marketing and set the prices. $350,000 for the no car, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, and then $450,000 house and land package for the 2-bedroom, 1-car, 2-bathroom home, and then $550,000 for what we call the village home, which was 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, 2 cars in tandem. Now, those were the prices for most of the standard product. The exception being we never sold a village home. The 550 was just not attractive. And we think that's because the buyers in that range probably had more options. We easily sold the urban pods and the micro terraces, that 450, 350 price range. And then we did achieve at the end, when we re-subdivided what was going to be a village home lot into 2 to make from 9 to 10, we did achieve a $300,000 house and land package. It probably should have been a little bit more, but we were keen to give a bit of a developer's discount to kind of get it done and get our finance and everything and sort of press a lot of buttons that was depending on that. So, but anyway, in the end of the day, those are the packages. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is because these were, they were done with the building contract being separate, the owners would then have the ability to go in and curate their homes a little bit, and they probably all added $20,000, give or take, to their building contracts to uplift some of the finishes, make a few changes. It's one of the reasons why you see so much diversity on the frontage, is because of those influences of the owners.
Yeah, very good. So, any other lessons that we've not really covered here, like? Sorry, you were aiming at first home buyers. That was something you've done before. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, tell us a
little.
Let
me tell you, there are 7 in the end. So we're going for 4 because we thought all of the 4 houses without cars and being at the lower price point. But we realized that the $450,000 price point was just as attractive to first home buyers. We ended up with 7 out of 10.
That's an amazing outcome. So
Mm.
certainly, I guess, an achievement to be proud of. You actually won an award for these. So tell us about the award that you won.
Well, we've won quite a few awards, and I do want to be mindful about the pricing in terms of they're probably worth about double that now, and that is not something that, from the point of view that I'm a keen advocate for affordable housing, it's not something I wish to apologize for, because I think that the owners that were going in, they didn't have a home before, and because they participated in this process, they were able to have an asset that will mean they've got housing security. So it of course means that new projects, those prices will be, quite a bit different from what I just quoted. But at the same time, it's just as long as we could do more of them, we can still get people into houses at a really competitive rate. Now, I've forgotten what you asked me.
Oh, about the first home buyers, the fact that you aimed for them,
Yeah,
it was a very attractive product for them because it was the right price
yeah,
point at the right time with the building bonus.
yeah.
But equally, I guess people want to actually have a house.
Well, I will say you did ask for some other challenges and things, and what I will say is that there was, at one stage, there was one real estate agent that said, "quote unquote," you will never sell these to first home buyers. So that was nice that we could, not do that, and follow through and actually sell them for almost double what we thought. And the other thing to mention is that not all banks are very happy with the split contract house and land package, particularly when it's in this quasi multi-dwelling looking format. So there was a lot of interesting discovery on which banks were comfortable with that and which weren't. And I think, without going into any names, I think if you've got something more innovative, you're really looking at your big four banks. And that really helped most of the buyers, was to kind of sift through the little, the smaller lenders were just not quite as capable of taking on that kind of risk, and the bigger banks were the ones that were comfortable.
So, $1 million question: would you do it again?
Oh, I'd love to do it again. I almost did it again. Yeah, you were actually asking about the awards. That's right. So I was going to say that there are many, many awards, and so we have received an award from the Urban Development Institute of Australia in small scale affordable development, the Australian Institute of Architects, the Gold Coast City Council for Urban Design Awards, Good Design Australia, and the Planning Institute of Australia. So I think we've hit almost all categories of awards with ENVI, and the second, or stage 2 of ENVI, was envisioned next door, just the lot to the north. We weren't quite, our development group wasn't quite able to fund that one, but we went through the process of the pre-lodgement meeting, if many of your listeners might know what that process is with planning. And we kind of worked out what was available. We had a contract on the site. So we were in control of the site. We had the pre-lodgement meeting, but we just didn't have the able to finance it. So we ended up going with a colleague who took the project over, and we just acted as his architect, and that is the Garden Terraces. It's even more amazing than ENVI, because although it's only got 6 freehold lots, those 6 freehold lots are sitting on just a 20-meter frontage, I believe. Could be 21, and they have probably the only pedestrian battle axe or access strips, again, so 2 access strips of 1.5 meters combined by a reciprocal easement to form 1 battle axe of 3 meters wide to access 2 houses at the back, which also do not have car parking.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Amy,
Yeah.
firstly, thank you very much for sharing, I guess, this story. Hopefully it has inspired some of our listeners out there to go, look, you can think differently. You can get very different outcomes. And equally, I hope that it's inspired some of our, I guess, let's just say, government authorities out there to say, look, creative solutions are workable. Density can be done smart and very user friendly, very community based. I can see as our population starts to grow, we're going to have to start to think of more and more of these kinds of developments where we're being smarter, not necessarily having car parks. We've got autonomous cars just around the corner. We don't need to have it parked at our house. It can be driving someone else somewhere in the not too distant future. We need to be thinking differently. Otherwise, we're just going to get more of the same.
Absolutely. And, if I could sum it up in one way, it's, density without the height. Everyone is associating density with height. And here's an option where you can have the density you need, but you don't have to have the height. And also the construction technique of class 1 construction versus class 2, very carbon friendly, very community friendly. There's a lot of good. There's such a lot of good. Yes, we would love to see more of these, and I would love to do another one.
No worries. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. For anyone who's out there and new to our world, we don't just do these Sunday sessions, but we actually also run events all the way around the country. We run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. If you're interested in coming to one of our events, you'll see industry experts just like Amy talking about different issues and challenges that you have in the development space. Plus, we have members of our community actually sharing real deals. So if you're super interested in that, click on the links below, and we would actually love to see you at one of our upcoming events. Amy, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your story. And hopefully we'll see you at one of our upcoming events in the not too distant future.
I hope to. And thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real honor.
No worries. Thank you. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.